Joe's childhood unfolded in the narrow confines of hardship, where each morning began with the weight of necessity. The small house where he lived was cramped, its walls carrying the scent of coal dust and damp earth. Shadows lingered in the corners, and the floors creaked under the rhythm of weary footsteps. Outside, the streets were rough and uneven, carved by years of use, echoing with the sounds of wagons, work boots, and children who quickly learned silence in the presence of fatigue. Life in this neighborhood did not grant comfort or leisure. Every face bore the marks of endurance. Every hand carried the proof of toil. Men rose before dawn, their bodies bent by endless labor, and women moved tirelessly through routines that allowed no rest. It was an existence where the luxury of choice did not exist. Hunger was a familiar companion, and the struggle for survival was a daily ritual that demanded patience, grit, and a stubborn will to continue. Beneath this rhythm of labor, however, something restless stirred within him. While others seemed resigned to the endless cycle of work and exhaustion, Joe felt the pull of a different path. His gaze often drifted beyond the fences and rooftops, searching for signs of a broader world. In moments of quiet, when the day's demands finally loosened their grip, he imagined a life where strength was not wasted on mere survival, but transformed into something greater. He observed the men around him, many already defeated before their lives had truly begun. Their eyes carried a dullness, their steps lacked purpose, and their voices spoke of resignation more than hope. Joe watched them with a silent promise forming inside him. He refused to become one of them, bound by despair and forgotten by time. A fire, faint but insistent, grew in his heart, urging him toward a destiny that would not allow surrender. In the stillness of those early years, amid the coal-dusted air and the heavy silence of tired streets, Joe nurtured the determination that one day he would break free. It was a vow whispered not in words, but in the way he clenched his fists after long hours, in the way his chest lifted each morning despite exhaustion, and in the way his eyes sought a horizon others had long stopped searching for. This quiet defiance was the beginning of a journey, one that would carry him far from the narrow confines of his youth into battles that demanded more than survival. The first time Joe entered the boxing gym, the air struck him like a wave. It carried the sharp scent of sweat, leather, and dust, and it trembled with the rhythm of fists pounding against heavy bags. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, cutting through the haze and scattering across the wooden floor, where chalk and footprints had layered over time. The place was alive with sound, the thud of gloves, the shuffle of feet, the rasp of breath. And in that chaos, Joe felt an unfamiliar sense of belonging. The gym became his second home, though it was harsher than the streets he came from. The coaches barked orders, the bags swung back with punishing weight, and the ropes of the ring burned against his skin when he leaned into them too long. Yet none of this discouraged him. His body, already hardened by years of labor, adapted quickly. At first, his punches were clumsy, his movements heavy, but with repetition came control. His breathing learned a new rhythm, steady and deliberate, as if his lungs had finally discovered their true purpose. His fists found direction, and his steps began to carry balance. Every day brought new exhaustion. Muscles burned, skin bruised, and sweat drenched his clothes until they clung to him like a second skin. But this pain was different from the fatigue of his childhood chores. It was a pain that promised growth, a sharpness that hinted at transformation. Joe embraced it, returning again and again to the gym with the determination of someone who had discovered not just a sport, but a calling. Before long, the quiet work of training gave way to the noise of competition. His first amateur fights were small events, crowded rooms with makeshift rings and restless audiences. Opponents came in all forms, some lightning quick, others built like stone, many carrying more experience than him. He stumbled against their speed, felt the weight of their strength, and learned the sting of defeat. Each fall shook him, but each time he rose with more resolve. Gradually, his persistence began to shape his reputation. Spectators noticed the boy who never backed down, the fighter who absorbed punishment only to return stronger. Victory started to come, hard-earned and often narrow, but enough to catch attention. Whispers spread from gym corners to neighborhood streets. Joe had something rare, something that could not be taught. His name began to circle in conversations, spoken not loudly, but with a sense of possibility. In those early days, every round in the ring was a step away from obscurity and a step toward a future he had only begun to imagine. The rhythm of fists against leather, the heat of the lights above the ring, and the roar of small crowds stitched together the foundation of his new life. Though still unpolished, Joe carried within him a force that grew stronger with every fight. It was the force of persistence, the unspoken belief that he was destined for more than the narrow streets of his childhood. The whispers that once drifted through gym corners began to travel farther, reaching ears that searched for new talent. Promoters, always hungry for the next star, turned their attention toward Joe. One day the offer came, the chance to step beyond the amateur ranks and enter the world of professionals. The decision carried the weight of an unseen cliff, a leap into a place where the ground was uncertain. It brought fear, the thrill of expectation, and the fragile spark of hope. Yet inside him there was no true hesitation. Something deeper than reason told him the path was already unfolding, and all he needed to do was follow it. The professional ring proved harsher than anything he had faced before. Opponents no longer fought for practice or pride, but for survival, recognition, and money. Their punches landed with heavier intent, sharpened by experience and ambition. Crowds grew louder, their voices swelling into a storm that pressed against him from every side. The noise of the arena, the glare of the lights, and the judgment of countless eyes created a weight he had never carried in amateur bouts. The newspapers began to write his name, sometimes with praise, sometimes with doubt. Headlines rose and fell like tides, questioning his endurance or proclaiming his promise. Joe learned to live with both, ignoring the noise as best he could. He clenched his jaw, lowered his head, and pushed forward, round after round, fight after fight. Pain was constant, but so was growth. Each victory lifted him higher, each loss carved new lessons. As the months passed, his presence in the ring became something undeniable. His movements grew sharper, his will hardened, and his reputation began to take root. His eyes carried a fire that refused to dim, the kind of fire that audiences recognized even before the bell rang. It was the fire of a man who had chosen his fate and accepted the cost of following it. Then came the challenge that stood above all others, a match whispered about in gyms and shouted in arenas, a fight that would not simply test his skills but define his future. The moment loomed before him like a mountain peak in the distance, daunting yet impossible to ignore. Everything he had endured, every strike taken, and every lesson learned had led to this. Joe stood at the edge of destiny, knowing that the outcome of the next battle could change the course of his life forever. The lights of the arena burned down like the sun itself, casting long shadows across the canvas and blinding those who stood beneath them. The crowd's roar surged in waves, a relentless storm of expectation, excitement, and pressure. In the center, Joe faced an opponent whose name carried weight, a fighter whose reputation preceded him and filled the arena with unspoken fear. Every move,
Every feint, every punch thrown was measured against decades of experience. Joe moved with all the strength and skill he had cultivated, his fists cutting the air, his body reacting instinctively, his mind focused on survival and victory. Yet despite every effort, the blows he delivered failed to land with the precision he needed. His breathing became ragged, his movement slowed, his confidence wavered. Each strike from his adversary hit like a hammer, leaving him stunned and disoriented, questioning the gap between what he had imagined and what the reality demanded. Then came the moment when the weight of everything he had learned and endured collided with fate. A punch struck him squarely, his balance faltered, and in an instant he was on the canvas. The referee's count echoed through the arena, each second stretching longer than the last. Pain radiated through his body, but it was not just physical. His spirit, too, felt the heavy pull of failure. The cheers of the crowd blurred into a single oppressive wave, and the flashes of cameras captured the image of a fighter who had fallen short. Outside the ropes, the press wasted no time. Headlines emphasized his loss, the narrative of his defeat spreading faster than his victories ever had. Friends and strangers alike whispered, questioned, and doubted. And yet, amidst the chaos of disappointment and the sting of humiliation, Joe experienced a quiet clarity. The world had judged him, but he had not finished judging himself. The emptiness he felt was not a prison, but a signal. Within it lay the reminder that every setback carried its lesson. Every failure contained the seed of future strength. Though the weight of the defeat pressed upon him, heavy as stone on shoulders worn by struggle, Joe knew that this was a step along the path, not the end of it. In that moment, he understood the truth of resilience. Strength was not measured only in victories, but in the courage to rise, to return, and to face the next challenge with the knowledge of what had been lost and what remained to be claimed. The bell rang, the crowd roared, the night carried the scent of sweat and iron, and Joe began the slow process of standing. Not yet victorious, but unbroken. His mind already shaping the next fight, the next chance, the next triumph. The months following defeat were filled with silence, discipline, and relentless effort. The world outside seemed to move on, indifferent to his struggle, but within the walls of the gym, time slowed to the rhythm of punches striking heavy bags, the squeak of shoes on worn wooden floors, and the steady thump of his own heartbeat. Each morning began before the sun had risen, the air thick with the scent of sweat, leather, and determination. Joe's body ached constantly, muscles straining, joints stiffening, yet he embraced the pain as a necessary companion on the path back. He retrained himself in every detail, breaking habits that had gone unnoticed, refining movements until each motion carried precision. His breathing became a metronome, marking the passage of hours, guiding the timing of his strikes, the weaving of his footwork, the rhythm of his defense. His hands, once only instruments of power, now worked in harmony with his mind, calculating angles, anticipating reactions, and delivering blows that were both forceful and deliberate. Bruises and cuts became maps of effort, markers of progress that no words could capture. Time passed unnoticed, measured only by repetition, sweat, and the slow strengthening of spirit. In quiet moments, he would pause and feel the fire within, the unyielding flame of ambition that had survived defeat, that had not been extinguished by humiliation or despair. This inner fire guided him, offering focus when exhaustion threatened to collapse him, offering clarity when doubt whispered its poisonous lies. It was no longer the reckless desire of youth, but a tempered resolve, a force honed by hardship and introspection. The day came when he was ready to step into the ring once more. Every step across the arena floor resonated with intention. His presence alone spoke of the countless hours spent in solitary preparation, the months of rebuilding strength, precision, and confidence. He moved with certainty, each movement purposeful, each punch flowing with calculated power. The crowd, sensing a change, rose to their feet, their cheers carrying not just excitement but recognition of transformation. Opponents found themselves facing not just a fighter, but a man who had emerged from the shadows of defeat, sharpened, disciplined, and unwavering. With each exchange, each combination, the past loss seemed to dissolve, replaced by a rising momentum, a clarity that only comes from relentless perseverance. Punches landed with the weight of intention, blocks and dodges executed with the quiet confidence of mastery. The arena vibrated with energy, the crowd's voices blending into a singular force that propelled him forward. Opponents fell, not merely from the impact of blows, but from the inevitability of a fighter who had reconciled with failure and emerged stronger. By the end of the night, Joe had reclaimed more than victories. He had reclaimed his spirit, his reputation, and the unmistakable sense of self that comes only from facing adversity and triumphing through unwavering effort. The light of the ring no longer burned with intimidation or fear. It illuminated a man who had endured, who had rebuilt, and who now stood ready to carry the fire within him into every future challenge. His return was complete, not only in the eyes of the world, but in the quiet certainty of his own heart. The moment of ultimate trial arrived. The arena was immense, a cavern of sound and light, filled with thousands of spectators whose voices rose and fell like waves crashing against unseen shores. Spotlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the ring with an almost sacred intensity, casting shadows that danced across the faces of the crowd. Joe stepped into the center, no longer the boy from a cramped home, but a man forged by struggle, pain, and relentless effort. Every movement carried the weight of experience, every stance exuded confidence, every glance reflected the countless hours of preparation and the unbroken spirit that had driven him forward. The fight unfolded as a prolonged test of endurance and skill. Each exchange, each combination of punches was executed with precision, the rhythm of his movements synchronizing with the pulse of the arena. His body moved fluidly, guided by instinct and refined technique, his fists cutting through the air with purpose and authority. Breathing became more than survival. It marked the cadence of strategy, the tempo of engagement, the music to which the battle itself seemed to dance. Pain came, as it always did, but it was no longer an adversary. It was a familiar companion, reminding him of every obstacle overcome, every setback transformed into strength. As the rounds progressed, the tension built to a near unbearable level. Opponent and champion circled, struck, defended, and measured each other with unwavering intensity. Sweat and effort blended into a single testament of endurance. With each strike, Joe's experience shone through, his movements calculated, efficient, unstoppable. The crowd sensed the culmination of years of struggle, the visible manifestation of perseverance and growth. And then, in a moment that seemed suspended outside of time, his adversary fell, yielding to the inevitability of a man who had mastered himself before mastering the fight. For an instant, the world itself seemed to pause. The roar of the crowd, the flash of lights, the pounding of hearts, all converged into a single, overwhelming affirmation of achievement. Joe stood in the center of the ring, feeling the culmination of his journey not as triumph over an opponent, but as harmony with the path he had walked. The sweat, the bruises, the moments of despair and doubt all coalesced into clarity, into a sense of purpose fulfilled. He understood in that silence between roars that every struggle, every fall, every laborious repetition had been necessary. Strength, he realized, was born from perseverance, resilience, and unwavering focus. Loss had been transformed into wisdom, pain into discipline, and the fight into music composed of determination, courage, and heart. In that moment, his story became a lesson for countless others, a living testament that no matter how harsh the journey, the path of commitment and persistence leads inevitably toward light and fulfillment. The arena exploded once more, a tidal wave of admiration and awe. Joe raised his hands not in arrogance, but in acknowledgement of the journey, in gratitude for the trials that had shaped him, and in recognition that the harmony he now embodied was the result of a lifetime of unyielding resolve. He had reached the summit of his potential, and in doing so had illuminated for the world the timeless truth. True strength is born not from circumstance, but from relentless perseverance, and the human spirit is capable of rising again and again toward its highest expression.